In one of my recent videos, we discussed the 3 foundational tools that NHL GMs have at their disposal when deciding the future direction of their team, which are of course trading, because whether it's a blockbuster trade, swapping stars, or trading future assets for that final missing piece.
Arturi Lehkonen has scored, and for the second straight year, he sent his team in overtime.
That may cement your team a cup. Free agency. Now, this route may seem nice, as you don't have to give up current assets to acquire a star player, but does come at the cost of a potential overpayment. And if done incorrectly, this can cause damage on your franchise for years. So, tread lightly. And last, but in my opinion most importantly, drafting and developing. Because assembling an A-team of scouts and development staff to make use of every draft pick is the surefire way of a dynasty. Because as I mentioned in the Steve Yzerman video, this is where he succeeds, as he hits slam dunks, home runs, which is single-handedly the reason why Tampa is as dominant as they are today. However, not that drafting and developing is a simple task, but it is at least a clear direction a team can focus on. So what happens when you take over a team that has gone from the top of the league, back to the bottom, back to the top, only to end up putting up one of the worst regular season records in the post-expansion era? A team that already has future franchise pieces, yet is more inconsistent than Patrick Laine's goal production. June of 1987, little did the Quebec Nordiques know, soon to be Colorado Avalanche, but they would draft the greatest player in their franchise's history. And one of the all-time greats, 15th overall, Joe Sakic, Burnaby Joe, a massive draft steal. Not only was Joe Sakic a bona fide superstar, but he was an incredible leader, enough to become one of the youngest captains in history at age 21, during a time when teams would never name a young captain. In 1996, he would lead the Avalanche to the Stanley Cup after a dominant 34-point performance, where he would also take home the Conn Smythe. Several years later, he would do it again, winning another Stanley Cup. And what defined Joe Sakic as such a special player was his leadership ability. He knew the game, he had the talent, he knew how to motivate and elevate his team to greatness. And with that, it was only time before Joe Sakic took over as general manager. And in 2014, Joe Sakic would be named GM, given an extremely difficult task of getting this up and down roster back on track. Because as I mentioned before, this is not a Steve Yzerman in Detroit situation where the team is already torn down and you can have your sole focus on drafting and developing. Absolutely not. As this Avalanche team was a damn roller coaster. In fact, just look at this graph. This team was on some yo-yo shit. In 2007, Sakic was still on the team and had just put up 100 points, yet they would miss the playoffs by 1 single point. In 2008, Sakic, now at the age of 39, would get his hand stuck in a snowblower. Yes, you heard that right, a snowblower, which would lead him to miss nearly half the season. But Colorado would still end up as a top team in the West and even make it to the second round. In 2009, they were the 3rd worst team in the NHL, thus they would draft Matt Duchene. The next season they would make the playoffs, yet the season after that, the only team worse was the freaking Edmonton Oilers, and they would draft Gabriel Landeskog 2nd overall. And at this point, I think you get it. Up and down, up and down, up and down. Ideally, when a team goes from championship contender, you want to tear it down to some extent, land some top picks in the draft, and steadily see upward growth year after year. But as for the Avalanche, you didn't know if they're going to be last or a team making it past the second round. It was absurd. So when Joe Sakic took over this team, it was an extremely hard puzzle to solve. I don't know what level of respect that Sakic and Yzerman have earned, where they can go out and absolutely fleece teams But goddamn, did Joe Sakic go on a tear of making slam dunk blockbuster trades. Because after a pretty terrible Ryan O'Reilly trade, it has only been slam dunk after slam dunk. After what seemed like years of Matt Duchene headlining trade news, Joe Sakic would be patient, orchestrating one of the most lopsided trades of this era. Because even though Matt Duchene was coming off several years of regression, Joe Sakic would receive a king's ransom, receiving Shane Bowers, who was just drafted in the first round, Samuel Girard, who is a puck-moving stud, Kamenev, a second and a third round pick. But most importantly, a 2019 first round pick, which turned out to be Bowen Byram, but we'll get back to that in a second. All of this for Duchene, who the locker room was reportedly fed up with. They would acquire Andre Burakovsky for just a second and a third, a player who was an instrumental secondary scorer on this roster. Sakic would then fleece, and I mean fleece, the Toronto Maple Leafs for Nazem Kadri, trading out Alex Kerfoot and Tyson Barrie, the best second-line center in the NHL, who is on pace for 100 points. And without Kadri, I don't know if the Avalanche even win the cup this season. They would take a chance on Darcy Kemper for a first-round pick, and what might actually, low-key, be an even bigger fleece job was trading 2 second-round picks. Count it, 2 second-round picks for Devon Toews, a premier two-way defenseman who just finished 8th in Norris voting. And finally, they would trade what was basically a first-round pick for Justin Barron in a second for Arturi Lehkonen.
Loose in front, Arturi Lehkonen has scored, and for the second straight year, he sent his team in overtime to the Stanley Cup final.
A trade that was seen as a massive overpayment. But it was as if Joe Sakic had a magic ball, as Lehkonen would score 4 game-winning goals this past playoffs.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Joe Sakic would make his first official pick as GM during the 2015 NHL draft, where he would select Mikko Rantanen, who of course has developed into a star. In 2017, after finishing with one of the worst post-expansion records in the game's history, and after losing the draft lottery, Joe Sakic would draft the next Bobby freaking Orr in Cale Makar. What I love about Cale Makar's development is that most NHL teams would readily make a roster spot the next season. I mean, let's refer back to Jesse Pulparty, who was extremely unpolished, yet somehow made the opening night roster that following fall after being drafted. Rushing a prospect can be extremely detrimental to a prospect's development. And not only did Makar not make the roster the next season after being drafted, but he would spend an additional 2 seasons playing in the NCAA.
Del Geyso fake, Makar, one-timer score!
Where we would see monumental development. And of course, confidence building, which is why he'd start his NHL career with a boom, and why he already has a Calder, Norris, and Conn Smythe. Remember that Duchene trade? That would turn into the 4th overall pick in 2019, which was used on Bowen Byram, who I was extremely impressed with during this playoff run. And the combination of Byram and Makar might just be one of the best pairings the NHL has ever seen going into the future. We are talking about a pairing who may be battling each other for Norris. Free agency. This is where things get strategic, as Joe Sakic during his time never made a big splash, overpaying in free agency, with one of his biggest signings being Valeri Nichushkin, and we know how that went. And I guess I'll add in the career redemption of Jack Johnson. In all these trades, draft picks, development, went from a team with no identity or consistency to a complete roster built from the bottom up. Timely draft picks, depth, high-end scoring, superstar forwards and defensemen. A team that was able to knock down Steve Yzerman's own Masterclass in Tampa. And for a team that not only has superstars, but more players and or prospects who can grow into superstars, this team has a scary future.
It sound right, boy.